They said the girls would never smile again. But everything changed the moment one woman reached out her hand. What happened next was something no one in that town expected. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The autumn wind scattered golden leaves across the dusty main street of Whispering Pines, a small settlement nestled at the foot of the Smoky Mountains in Tennessee. The year was 1876, and the scars of war still ran deep in this corner of America. Among those most affected were the displaced Cherokee families, who had managed to remain in isolated pockets of their ancestral lands, despite the Trail of Tears decades earlier. Sarah Bennett stepped off the stagecoach, her simple blue dress collecting dust as she surveyed the frontier town. At 32, the schoolteacher from Boston carried both visible and invisible baggage, a small leather trunk and the weight of personal tragedy. Her husband Thomas had died in a factory accident 2 years prior, leaving her alone and purposeless until a letter from the Western Aid Society offered her a teaching position in this remote outpost. "Welcome to nowhere, ma'am," the stagecoach driver said, handing her the trunk. "Town's got one hotel, one saloon, and more trouble than it deserves." Sarah nodded, grateful yet apprehensive. "Thank you. The school, where might I find it?" "End of the street, past the general store. Been empty since the last teacher gave up and headed back east." He tipped his hat. "Good luck to you." As Sarah walked through town, she felt the stares of locals, some curious, some suspicious, some indifferent. The frontier had little patience for formalities. At the hotel, a stern-faced woman named Mrs. Hawkins showed her to a small but clean room. "School's been closed 6 months," Mrs. Hawkins explained. "Most white families teach their children at home now, if they bother at all. The Cherokee children don't come to town much since the incident." "Incident?" Sarah asked, setting down her trunk. Mrs. Hawkins' face tightened. "Joseph White Cloud, best tracker in the territory, respected even by those who wouldn't shake his hand. Served as a guide for the army. Some drunken soldiers accused him of betrayal during a skirmish with raiders, beat him half to death, left him crippled." She shook her head. "His daughters haven't been the same since, twin girls 10 years old. Used to laugh so loud you could hear them clear across the creek." Sarah's heart constricted. "And their mother?" "Died in childbirth. Those girls were Joseph's whole world. Now he can barely provide for them with his injuries." That evening, Sarah sat alone in the town's small restaurant, picking at a plate of beans and cornbread when a tall man with a silver star pinned to his vest approached her table. "Sheriff Thomas Miller, ma'am," he introduced himself, hat in hand. "Heard we've got a new school teacher." "Sarah Bennett," she responded, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. "Though I'm beginning to wonder if there will be any students for me to teach." The sheriff sat down with a weary sigh. Town's been through hard times. War changed everything. The remaining Cherokee mostly keep to themselves in the foothills. His eyes reflected genuine concern. "Joseph White Cloud was building a bridge between worlds before—" He trailed off. "I heard about what happened to him," Sarah said softly. "Shameful business. Those soldiers were passing through, not local men, but the damage was done. Trust broken again." He studied her face. "Why'd you come all this way, Mrs. Bennett? Most Easterners take one look at this place and count the days until they can leave." Sarah looked down at her wedding ring, twisting it absently. "I lost someone too, Sheriff. Sometimes a fresh start in a place where nobody knows your story is the only way forward." The sheriff nodded slowly. "Well, if you're determined to reopen that school, you might want to start with Joseph's daughters, Lily and Rose. Brightest children I ever met. They speak better English than half this town, and their father values education. Before the attack, he talked about sending them to a proper school back east someday. Where can I find them?" "Cabin about 2 miles up Eagle Creek. Follow the main trail north out of town." The sheriff's expression turned serious. "But I should warn you, Joseph's pride runs deep. He won't accept charity, and he's wary of strangers now, especially those who look like the men who broke his body." The next morning, Sarah borrowed a horse from the livery and followed the winding trail along Eagle Creek. The mountains rose majestically around her, ablaze with autumn colors. Eventually, she spotted a small log cabin with smoke rising from the stone chimney. As she approached, A man emerged onto the porch, leaning heavily on a hand-carved cane. Joseph Whitecloud's face bore the weathered dignity of his 40 years and the permanent marks of violence. His left leg was twisted unnaturally, and one eye was clouded, but his stance remained proud. "You're lost," he called out, his deep voice carrying across the yard. It wasn't a question. Sarah dismounted, tying her horse to a fence post. "My name is Sarah Bennett. I'm the new school teacher in town." "There is no school," he replied flatly. "Not yet," Sarah admitted, gathering her courage as she approached. "But I intend to change that, and I'm told your daughters were excellent students." Joseph's expression remained impassive, but Sarah noticed two small faces peering from the cabin window, identical dark eyes watching her with caution and curiosity. "My daughters no longer go to town," Joseph said firmly. "They learn what they need from me and from the elders." Sarah nodded respectfully. "I understand your reluctance, Mr. Whitecloud, but I've come a long way to teach, and I will teach anyone willing to learn." She paused, then added, "Knowledge is something no one can take from them, no matter what happens." For the first time, something flickered in Joseph's good eye, a recognition of shared understanding. "Wait here," he said finally, turning back toward the cabin with his uneven gait. Sarah stood in the autumn sunlight, heart pounding. A moment later, two girls emerged, dressed in simple homespun dresses, their long black hair neatly braided. Their faces were solemn mirrors of each other, showing none of the childhood joy Mrs. Hawkins had described. "This is Rose," Joseph indicated one girl, "and Lily." He nodded to the other. Though identical, Sarah already noticed subtle differences in how they held themselves. Rose slightly more forward, Lily's fingers nervously playing with her braid. "Hello." Sarah smiled warmly. "I'm very pleased to meet you both." The girls nodded silently, eyes downcast. "The teacher wants to know if you wish to return to school," Joseph explained to his daughters. Rose spoke first, her voice barely audible. "Will the boys who throw stones be there?" Sarah felt a surge of protective anger. "Not if I have anything to say about it," she promised firmly. For the first time, Lily looked directly at Sarah, searching her face for sincerity. "Our father cannot take us. His leg—" "I could come here," Sarah offered, looking to Joseph. "3 times a week to start. We could have lessons on your porch when weather permits, inside when it doesn't." Joseph's face revealed nothing, but after a long moment he asked his daughters, "Is this what you want?" The twins exchanged glances, an entire conversation passing between them in silence. Finally, they nodded in unison. "Then we will try," Joseph said, his words carrying the weight of reluctant hope. "You may begin tomorrow." The first frost of the season greeted Sarah as she made her way up the mountain trail 3 weeks later. Her breath formed small clouds in the chilly morning air, and her fingers felt stiff around the reins despite her woolen gloves. The path to the Whitecloud cabin had become familiar now, each bend and creek crossing recognized like old friends. At the small clearing, she saw Lily and Rose already waiting on the porch, wrapped in blankets, their school slates cleaned and ready. Joseph sat in his hand-carved chair, whittling a small piece of wood, his good eye watching her approach with what Sarah now recognized as cautious respect rather than suspicion. "Good morning," Sarah called cheerfully as she dismounted. "I've brought something special today." She reached into her saddlebag and pulled out 3 books, worn copies of Little Women, Robinson Crusoe, and a collection of Shakespeare's sonnets. The girl's eyes widened. Books were precious commodities in the mountains, especially ones that weren't religious texts or practical manuals. "These are from my personal collection," Sarah explained as she handed them to the twins. "We'll read them together, but you may keep them between lessons." Rose ran her fingers reverently over the embossed cover of Little Women, while Lily carefully opened Robinson Crusoe to its illustrated frontispiece. "These are too valuable to give away," Joseph said, setting aside his whittling. Sarah shook her head. "They're not gifts, Mr. Whitecloud. They're investments. Your daughters will return them when they've finished their education, perhaps when they go to college." Joseph's eyebrow rose slightly. "College? Why not?" Sarah challenged gently. "They're the brightest students I've ever taught. Rose has a natural gift for mathematics that shouldn't be wasted, and Lily's writing shows remarkable insight for someone her age." As they settled into their lesson on the porch, with Joseph quietly observing from his chair, Sarah noticed how the girls had slowly begun to transform over the weeks. Their answers came more readily now, and occasionally, Lily would reveal a fleeting smile when she mastered a difficult concept. Rose remained more reserved, but her eyes had regained their spark of curiosity. "Today we'll continue with fractions," Sarah announced, "and then move on to the poetry I promised." As the lesson progressed, clouds gathered ominously over the mountains. Joseph glanced skyward with concern. "Storms coming earlier than expected," he observed. "You should head back to town before the trail becomes dangerous, Mrs. Bennet." Sarah looked at the darkening sky with disappointment. "Perhaps you're right. We'll continue with Shakespeare next time." As she gathered her teaching materials, the first heavy raindrops began to fall, quickly intensifying into a downpour. Thunder rumbled through the valley. "Too late now," Joseph stated, rising laboriously to his feet. "Creek will be rising fast. You can't cross until it subsides." He gestured toward the cabin door. "You'll have to wait it out." It was the first time Sarah had been invited inside their home. The cabin was modest but meticulously kept, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. Handmade furniture, simple but expertly crafted, filled the small space. Colorful woven blankets added warmth, and bundles of dried herbs hung from the ceiling beams. "It's beautiful," Sarah said sincerely, removing her wet coat. Joseph nodded in acknowledgement as he stoked the fire. "My wife made the blankets. The Cherokee have always been weavers." Rose brought Sarah a cup of hot herbal tea. "It's blackberry leaf," she explained. "Good for chills." "Thank you," Sarah smiled, warming her hands around the earthenware mug. As the storm raged outside, an unexpected intimacy developed in the cabin. Lily brought out a small wooden flute, and after some encouragement, played a haunting melody that made Sarah's heart ache with its beauty. "That was your mother's song," Joseph told his daughters softly. It was the first time he had mentioned their mother in Sarah's presence. "Do you remember her?" Sarah asked the girls gently. Rose shook her head. "Only through Father's stories. She was strong and kind," Joseph said, his voice deepening with emotion. "Like the river, powerful but gentle when needed." He looked at his daughters with undisguised love. "She gave her life bringing you into this world, but she would have thought it a fair trade." The rain continued well into the afternoon. To pass the time, Sarah suggested they continue their lesson. Soon she was reading Shakespeare's sonnets aloud by the firelight, explaining the complex language and imagery to her captivated audience. "Love alters not with his brief hours and weeks, but bears it out even to the edge of doom," she recited. "What do you think the poet means by that?" Lily considered the question thoughtfully. "That real love doesn't change, even when difficult things happen." "Exactly," Sarah smiled. "True love remains constant through hardship." Joseph, who had been listening silently, spoke unexpectedly. "My people have a similar saying. Love is like the mountains, unmovable by storm or season." Sarah met his gaze across the room. "That's beautiful." As evening approached, the rain finally slackened, though the creek remained swollen. Joseph insisted Sarah stay for the simple but hearty dinner of venison stew and cornbread that the girls prepared. Around the table, Sarah noticed how the formality between them had softened. "Will you tell us about Boston?" Rose asked suddenly as they ate. "What are the buildings like? How many people live there?" Sarah described the bustling city, the harbor filled with ships, the universities and libraries. "But it lacks this," she added, gesturing toward the window where the setting sun now broke through the clouds, painting the wet forest in golden light. "Do you miss it?" Lily asked perceptively. Sarah considered the question. "I miss certain things, the bookshops, the concerts, but not as much as I expected to." After dinner, as the last light faded, Joseph announced that the creek would likely remain unsafe to cross until morning. "You'll have to stay the night," he said matter-of-factly. "The girls will prepare a place for you." Rose and Lily quickly arranged a makeshift bed near the fire using extra blankets. As they worked, Sarah noticed something remarkable. They were whispering together, and then Rose actually laughed at something her sister said. The sound, though quiet, filled the cabin with unexpected warmth. Joseph heard it too. His stoic expression softened momentarily, and he glanced at Sarah with what might have been gratitude in his eyes. Later, as the cabin settled into nighttime silence, With the twins asleep in their small bedroom and Joseph in his chair by the dying fire, Sarah lay awake, listening to the gentle rhythm of raindrops on the roof. For the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of purpose that had been missing since Thomas died. These mountains, this family, they were beginning to feel like home in a way Boston never had. In the morning, Sarah awoke to find Joseph already up, examining the trail from the porch. "Creek's down," he reported when she joined him. "Path should be passable now." He paused, then added, "Sheriff Miller will be concerned about your absence." "Probably," Sarah agreed, though he seems like a man who understands the mountain's unpredictability. As she prepared to leave after breakfast, the girls presented her with a small woven pouch filled with dried berries for her journey. "Thank you for the books," Rose said, her voice stronger than Sarah had ever heard it. "And for the poetry," Lily added, meeting Sarah's eyes with newfound confidence. Sarah mounted her horse, emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "I'll be back in 2 days for our next lesson. Perhaps we can start planning that Thanksgiving presentation we discussed." As she rode away, she glanced back to see all 3 figures still standing on the porch, Joseph leaning on his cane, flanked by his daughters. They raised their hands in farewell, and for the first time, Sarah saw both girls smiling openly in the morning sunlight. The first snow of winter dusted whispering pines like confectioner's sugar as Sarah hurried down the town's main street toward the Mercantile. 2 months had passed since the storm that had marked a turning point in her relationship with the White Cloud family. Now, with Thanksgiving approaching, Sarah clutched a list of supplies for the small celebration she had planned with her students. The bell above the Mercantile door jingled as she entered, stamping snow from her boots. Inside, the warm, pungent smell of coffee, leather, and dried goods enveloped her. Mr. Peterson, the shopkeeper, greeted her with a nod. "Morning, Mrs. Bennett. Cold one today." "Indeed it is," Sarah agreed, unwrapping her scarf. "I need a few things for my students' Thanksgiving presentation." As she selected items from her list, paper, colored pencils, a length of fabric for costumes, Sarah noticed a group of men huddled near the pot-bellied stove, their conversation intentionally loud enough for her to overhear. "Ain't natural. A white woman spending so much time with those Indians," one man said, spitting tobacco juice into a brass spittoon. "Teaching them ideas above their station. Heard she stays overnight up there sometimes," another added with suggestive emphasis. "Makes you wonder what kind of teaching is really happening." Sarah's cheeks burned, but she continued selecting her purchases with deliberate calm. These weren't the first whispers she'd endured since becoming Joseph and his daughter's advocate in town. Sheriff Miller, who had been browsing a shelf of ammunition, approached the gossiping men. "That's enough, gentlemen," he said quietly, his hand resting casually on his holster. "Mrs. Bennett's doing this town a service, bringing education where it's sorely needed." The men grumbled but dispersed. The sheriff tipped his hat to Sarah as he passed. "Don't let them discourage you, Mrs. Bennett. Progress always faces resistance." "Thank you, Sheriff," Sarah replied, grateful for his intervention but aware it wouldn't stop the rumors. Outside the Mercantile, Sarah nearly collided with Mrs. Hawkins from the hotel. The older woman steadied her, noticing Sarah's troubled expression. "Walk with me," Mrs. Hawkins suggested, taking some of Sarah's packages. "You look like you could use a friendly ear." As they made their way through the snow-covered street, Sarah confided her frustrations. "The White Cloud girls are flourishing. Rose solved a mathematics problem yesterday that would challenge students twice her age. Lily has written poetry that brings tears to my eyes. And yet these people can only see their heritage, not their potential." Mrs. Hawkins nodded sympathetically. "People fear what challenges their understanding of the world. You're disrupting the order they've established." "But it's a flawed order," Sarah protested. "Of course it is," Mrs. Hawkins agreed. "That's precisely why your work matters." She paused before the hotel steps. "How is Joseph these days?" "I haven't seen him in town since before the attack." Sarah's expression softened. "His physical healing has plateaued, I'm afraid. The damage to his leg and eye is permanent. But in other ways," she hesitated, choosing her words carefully, "he's beginning to engage with the world again, through his daughters if nothing else. He's even started teaching me Cherokee words and sharing their cultural stories." Mrs. Hawkins studied Sarah's face with knowing eyes. Be careful with your heart, Sarah. Frontier life can be lonely, and it's easy to mistake gratitude for deeper feelings. Sarah blushed. I don't know what you mean. I think you do, the older woman replied gently. Just remember that no matter how much things are changing, this territory still has rigid boundaries. Crossing them has consequences. Later that afternoon, as Sarah rode the familiar trail to the White Cloud cabin with her supplies, Mrs. Hawkins' warning echoed in her mind. She couldn't deny that her feelings for Joseph had grown complicated. What had begun as professional respect had deepened into friendship, and now something she dared not name, even to herself. She found the girls waiting eagerly on the porch despite the cold, their breath visible in the frosty air. Mrs. Bennet, Lily called, waving excitedly. Father finished our costumes. Inside the cabin, Joseph sat by the fire, surrounded by scraps of leather and feathers. He had fashioned traditional Cherokee ceremonial attire in miniature for the twins. For their presentation, he explained as Sarah admired his craftsmanship. They will represent our people with dignity. They're beautiful, Sarah breathed, touching the intricate beadwork. But I thought you had reservations about their participation in a town event. Joseph's expression grew serious. I did. Perhaps I still do. He glanced at his daughters, who were excitedly examining Sarah's supplies. But they deserved to be seen and heard. To hide them away would be to admit defeat. The twins' Thanksgiving presentation had been Sarah's idea, a cultural exchange where all her students would share traditions from their heritage. So far, the White Cloud girls were her only native students, but 3 families from town had cautiously enrolled their children after seeing the progress Rose and Lily were making. We've been practicing our parts, Rose announced proudly. Would you like to hear? For the next hour, the girls demonstrated their presentation, which combined Cherokee Thanksgiving traditions with historical context about cooperation between settlers and indigenous peoples. Sarah was impressed by their confidence, a remarkable transformation from the silent, withdrawn children she'd first met. Afterward, as the girls went outside to collect firewood, Sarah helped Joseph prepare dinner. Your daughters are remarkable, she said, slicing cornbread. Their resilience humbles me. Joseph nodded, his good eye reflecting firelight. They take after their mother. He watched Sarah for a moment. And they have found strength in your belief in them. Sarah felt a flutter in her chest at his words. I've received far more than I've given, Joseph. Their hands brushed as they worked, and neither pulled away immediately. The moment stretched between them, laden with unspoken feelings. Finally, Joseph broke the silence. The town talks about you, about us. It cannot be easy. People will always talk, Sarah replied, meeting his gaze steadily. What matters is the truth we know. And what truth is that? He asked softly. Before Sarah could answer, the cabin door burst open as the girls returned with arms full of firewood, cheeks flushed from the cold. The moment passed, but something had shifted between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that could no longer be ignored. That evening, after the girls were asleep, Sarah and Joseph sat by the fire. Outside, snow fell more heavily, transforming the forest into a silent, white sanctuary. I should return to town, Sarah said reluctantly, though they both knew the weather made travel inadvisable. The storm says otherwise, Joseph replied, adding a log to the fire. The mountains have their own wisdom about where we should be. They sat in comfortable silence before Joseph spoke again. When I was a boy, my grandfather taught me that the Creator places people in our paths for reasons we may not understand until much later. He turned to face her. Why did you really come to Whispering Pines, Sarah? The directness of his question and his use of her first name caught her by surprise. She looked into the flames, gathering her thoughts. After Thomas died, I felt hollow. Teaching had always been my passion, but in Boston it became just a duty, performed without joy. She twisted her wedding ring absently. The Western Aid Society advertisement seemed like a chance to be useful again, in a place where education was scarce. I never expected— What? Joseph prompted gently when she trailed off. To find a home, Sarah admitted, finally meeting his gaze. To care so deeply about what happens here. Joseph nodded slowly. The girls need you. They have blossomed like spring flowers under your attention." He paused, then added more quietly, "And I have found myself looking forward to your visits for reasons beyond my daughter's education." Sarah's heart quickened. "Joseph, we come from different worlds," he interrupted softly. "Worlds with histories of blood and betrayal between them. But we don't have to be defined by that history," Sarah insisted. "Your daughters are proof that something new is possible." Joseph studied her face in the firelight. "You truly believe that?" "I do," Sarah whispered. "With all my heart." Joseph reached across the space between them and, with gentle hesitation, took her hand in his. The simple contact conveyed more than words could express: understanding, respect, and the tentative beginnings of something deeper. "The presentation," he said after a moment. "I will attend it. The girls should not stand alone." Sarah squeezed his hand, understanding the magnitude of his decision to return to town after so many months of isolation. "They'll be overjoyed. And afterward," Joseph continued, his voice carrying a note of determination, "perhaps it is time I rebuild what was broken, not just for myself, but for them, for the future they deserve." As the fire crackled and snow continued to fall outside, Sarah felt a sense of hope stronger than any she had known since arriving in Tennessee. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, in this cabin sheltered by ancient mountains, she had found unexpected healing, not just for Lily and Rose, but for Joseph, and perhaps most surprisingly, for herself. The town hall of Whispering Pines had never looked so festive. Evergreen boughs decorated with red berries lined the walls, and paper chains crafted by Sarah's students hung from the rafters. Lanterns cast a warm glow over the assembled crowd. Nearly every family in town had come for the Thanksgiving presentation, drawn by curiosity if nothing else. Sarah stood nervously at the back of the makeshift stage, helping her students with last-minute costume adjustments. The White Cloud twins wore their father's handcrafted ceremonial attire, their hair adorned with feathers and beads that caught the lamplight. They looked regal beyond their years, though Sarah could see tension in their small shoulders. "Is he here yet?" Lily whispered, peering anxiously toward the entrance. "Your father will come," Sarah assured her, though her own doubts grew as the clock ticked closer to the presentation's start time. Joseph's promise to attend had been momentous, his first public appearance since the attack that had left him injured and bitter. But the empty chair she'd reserved in the front row remained unclaimed. Sheriff Miller approached, hat in hand. "Quite a turnout, Mrs. Bennett. You've accomplished something remarkable here." "Not without help," Sarah replied, scanning the crowd once more for Joseph. "And it's not a success until it's over. I can't help but notice Mr. Thornton and his friends looking rather displeased." The sheriff followed her gaze to a group of men standing against the back wall, arms crossed defensively. "Don't worry about them. This is a public event, and they'll behave accordingly." His hand rested meaningfully on his holster. The town clock struck 7, and Sarah knew she couldn't delay any longer. With a final reassuring smile to her students, she stepped onto the stage. "Good evening, friends and neighbors," she began, her teacher's voice carrying to the far corners of the hall. "Thank you for joining us for Whispering Pines' first annual Thanksgiving Cultural Exchange. Tonight, our children will share traditions from their diverse heritages, reminding us that gratitude transcends all boundaries." As she spoke, the door at the back of the hall creaked open. A hush fell over the crowd as Joseph White Cloud entered, leaning heavily on his cane. He wore a clean white shirt under a dark vest, his long hair neatly braided, his bearing proud despite his disability. Sarah's heart swelled at the courage it must have taken him to walk into this room full of people who had either participated in or silently witnessed his ostracism. From the stage, Rose and Lily spotted their father, their faces transformed with joy and relief as Joseph made his way slowly to the empty chair in the front row. The whispers that followed him gradually subsided as Sarah continued her introduction, though tension remained palpable in the air. The presentation began with children of European descent sharing traditions from Germany, Ireland, and England. They recited poems, sang folk songs, and explained customs their grandparents had brought across the ocean. The audience responded with enthusiastic applause, parental pride evident on every face. Then came the moment Sarah had both anticipated and dreaded, Rose and Lily's turn. The twins walked to center stage with perfect poise, their matching costumes creating a striking image against the simple backdrop. A murmur rippled through the audience. Rose spoke first, her clear voice carrying surprisingly well for a child. Before the European settlers celebrated their first Thanksgiving, the Cherokee people had been giving thanks to the Creator for thousands of years. Lily continued, "Our tradition is called Selu Aitsuta, which honors Selu, the Corn Mother, who sacrificed herself to provide food for the Cherokee people." Together, the girls demonstrated a simplified version of the corn dance, moving with unexpected grace. Then they explained how the Cherokee gave thanks for each harvest, each hunt, each season, not just on one designated day. Gratitude is not a yearly feast, Rose concluded, but a daily practice. Sarah held her breath, watching the audience's reaction. For a moment, silence reigned. Then, from the front row, Joseph White Cloud rose to his feet with effort and began to applaud. Sheriff Miller immediately joined him, followed by Mrs. Hawkins, and gradually most of the audience. Not everyone participated. Thornton and his friends remained stone-faced at the back, but it was enough. The girls' faces shone with pride as they made their way back to their places among the other children. The remainder of the presentation proceeded without incident, culminating in all the students joining together to sing a song about friendship and Thanksgiving that Sarah had taught them. As the final notes faded, the applause was genuine and sustained. Afterward, as families mingled and enjoyed the simple refreshments provided, Sarah made her way to Joseph and his daughters. "You were magnificent," she told the twins, kneeling to embrace them. "I couldn't be prouder. Did we honor our people?" Rose asked, looking up at her father. Joseph nodded, emotion evident in his good eye. "Your mother would have been proud beyond words." Mrs. Hawkins approached with cups of hot cider. "That was quite something," she said warmly to the girls. "I learned more about Cherokee traditions tonight than in all my years living here." Other townspeople gradually joined their circle, some awkwardly, others with genuine interest, asking Joseph questions about Cherokee customs that he answered with measured dignity. It wasn't universal acceptance, but it was a beginning, a crack in the wall of separation that had seemed impenetrable months ago. Sheriff Miller appeared at Sarah's side. "You might want to wrap things up soon," he murmured. "Thornton and his friends have been drinking, and their mood isn't improving." Sarah nodded, understanding the wisdom of avoiding confrontation on this night of progress. She was helping Joseph and the girls gather their belongings when Thornton's voice cut through the dwindling conversations. "So now we're supposed to pretend the savages taught us everything," he called out, his words slurred. "Rewriting history to make everybody feel good?" A tense silence fell. Joseph straightened, placing protective hands on his daughter's shoulders. Sheriff Miller stepped forward. "That's enough, Thornton. Time for you to head home." "This is my town," Thornton snarled. "Been my family's town for 3 generations, and I don't need some Boston schoolmarm and her pet Indian telling my boy that—" "That what?" Sarah interrupted, stepping forward despite Joseph's warning glance. "That people different from ourselves have valuable knowledge and traditions? That respect flows both ways? What precisely offends you about that message, Mr. Thornton?" The man glared at her, momentarily speechless at her direct challenge. Finally, he spat, "You're undermining the natural order of things, woman, and you've forgotten your place." Before Sarah could respond, Joseph spoke, his deep voice commanding attention. "My daughters have broken no laws by sharing their heritage. They ask only for the respect freely given to every other child on that stage." He faced Thornton directly. "Your quarrel is with me, not with them, not with Mrs. Bennet." Something in Joseph's calm dignity seemed to inflame Thornton further. He took a menacing step forward, but Sheriff Miller interceded, physically blocking his path. "Not tonight, Thornton," the sheriff said firmly. "Not ever, if you have any sense left." He gestured to his deputy. "Escort Mr. Thornton and his friends home. Make sure they get there directly." As the troublemakers were led away, murmuring threats and obscenities, the remaining townspeople closed ranks around Joseph and his daughters. Whether from shared embarrassment or newfound solidarity, Sarah couldn't tell. But something had shifted. The lines dividing the community had blurred just slightly. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, soft flakes catching the lantern light as people made their way home. Joseph and the twins prepared their wagon for the journey back to their cabin, with several townsmen offering assistance, small, tentative gestures of reconciliation. "Will you ride with us, Mrs. Bennet?" Lily asked hopefully. Sarah glanced at Joseph, who nodded his agreement. "I would be honored," she replied, accepting his hand as he helped her into the wagon. As they traveled through the snowy darkness, the girls fell asleep, nestled under blankets between Sarah and Joseph. The only sounds were the creak of the wagon wheels and the soft jingling of the horse's harness. "It was worth it," Joseph said finally, breaking the comfortable silence. "Whatever comes tomorrow, tonight was worth it." "They were so brave," Sarah agreed, looking down at the sleeping twins. "Just like their father." Joseph shook his head. "It is easier to face physical danger than to risk hope, Sarah. Tonight I watched my daughter step into a future I had stopped believing was possible." He glanced at her, snowflakes catching in his dark hair. "You gave them that gift." "We gave it to them," Sarah corrected gently. "Together." At the cabin, they carefully carried the sleeping girls inside and tucked them into bed without waking them. Then Joseph built up the fire while Sarah prepared tea, moving around each other with the easy familiarity of established routine. Settled before the hearth, warming their hands around steaming mugs, Joseph turned to Sarah with unexpected resolution in his expression. "There is something I must say," he began, "before courage fails me." Sarah's heart quickened. "Yes? When my wife died, I believed I would never feel complete again. For years, the girls were enough. They had to be." He set his mug aside, turning to face her fully. "Then you arrived with your books and your Boston ways, determined to teach whether anyone wanted learning or not." A rare smile briefly transformed his solemn features. "And slowly, without permission, you awakened parts of me I thought had died with her." Sarah felt tears threatening. "Joseph, please let me finish," he said gently. "I know the world has strong opinions about a Cherokee man and a white woman. I know we would face obstacles far greater than tonight's small victory could overcome." "I'm not afraid of obstacles," Sarah whispered. Joseph reached for her hand. "No, you are not. It is one of many things I have come to love about you." The word hung between them, momentous and fragile. "I don't have much to offer," Joseph continued. "A broken body, a small cabin, a complicated life. But after tonight, I believe we could build something meaningful. Not just for the girls, but for ourselves. For this community, perhaps." Sarah placed her free hand against his cheek, feeling the warmth of his skin. "I've been alone since Thomas died, surrounded by people but hollow inside. Here, in these mountains with you and the girls, I've found purpose again, found joy." She took a deep breath. "Found love." Joseph leaned forward, hesitant despite her words, and Sarah met him halfway. Their kiss was gentle, tentative, a promise rather than a passion, a beginning rather than a culmination. When they separated, Joseph rested his forehead against hers. "The path will not be easy." "The worthwhile paths seldom are," Sarah replied, smiling through tears of happiness. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the forest in pristine white. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled warmly as two people from different worlds embraced a shared future. And in the small bedroom, two Cherokee girls who had forgotten how to smile slept peacefully, unaware that their family had just expanded in the most unexpected of ways, bringing with it the promise of new beginnings for them all. Spring would eventually come to the mountains, melting the snow and bringing fresh growth. But the seeds of change had already taken root in Whispering Pines, cultivated by a courageous father, nurtured by a determined teacher, and exemplified by two young girls who had found their voices again, teaching an entire community that healing begins with open hearts and joined hands.